So let's start off with talking a little bit about your background and what got you into AI or automation.
Yeah. So I've been selling something pretty much my whole life. And since 2019, I've been doing financial services. So things like life insurance, disability insurance, retirement insurance, things like that. Back then, 2019, I could make phone calls and get people on the phone and book appointments and run appointments and get people approved. And it was, I don't want to say simple, but it was certainly easier than it is today. And my journey with AI and automation really started mid 2023. That was when sort of ChatGPT came out and we were all able to hop on there and start messing around with it. And it's also when I was introduced to an automation platform called G. And then from there, it just kept evolving.
I don't know much about that platform. Could you tell us more about that platform and how you've used it to kind of help your business?
Well, yeah. So Go High Level was actually first presented to me as a white labeled product from a company that I was affiliated with. And they had rebranded it and they had put a lot of controls and regulations and limitations on it. So then when I found out that they had just claimed that they developed this thing and that it was really just another company's product, I went right to that. Right. And then I got to build it out myself. And the biggest thing is that when you're in a retail position, when you're dealing with leads, like people expressing interest in something, there is an expression called speed to lead, and it's very competitive. And in some ways it's great, in some ways it's unfortunate, right? And because of the world that we live in today, people don't really answer their phone for numbers they don't recognize, even if they just filled out a form and asked to be called. So what Go High Level enabled me to do was get a lead and respond instantly with a text message, whether I was available to respond or not. Regardless of what I was doing, whether I was with an agent or a client or my family or friends, if somebody clicked on my ad, they got an email right away with a link to get on my calendar and schedule a call. And that's just a base level example of how that sort of automation really impacted the work that I did.
So were you able to automate your current workflows or were you able to automate the customer acquisition part of it?
I was able to take my current workflows, including text messaging, emailing, phone calling, producing quotes, and I was able to automate a lot of it. Working with a quote, you have to collect certain information from the client. And now there are AI quoting tools for insurance. So then you take that information, you plug it into one of these AI-powered quoting tools, and it produces a list of carriers and products and quotes for your client.
That's interesting. I actually have a daughter and she's getting her ears pierced. And it was interesting to see because I have a lot of conversations with the chat GPT conversation part on your phone. I do a lot of brainstorming with it. And it was interesting to see that this tattoo parlor started using the AI as their intake coordinator for the phone. So I'm interested to see what kind of industry it's going to disrupt. Any thoughts on that?
I suspect that any industry that depends on intellectual proprietary information, where a person's knowledge is leveraged for value, is going to be in jeopardy.
Interesting. So could you give some examples? Maybe like a large business that you may know of?
I can give a ton of examples, and I can use my industry specifically. So one of the things that happens let's just use the life insurance industry as an example, carriers aren't really great at selling their products. So they go through independent agents. If you know anybody that's ever bought a life insurance policy directly from a carrier, you'll know that they are just a number. When they call the carrier, they're just a number. When they have an independent broker, an agent, they're a person in a family. When it's time and they're gone and that policy has to pay out, the beneficiaries get to call a person, and that person helps them through the process of making a claim. But today, the carriers don't have to be good at selling their products because AI can do it for them. And a person like you or I can very easily go online, interact with an AI bot, figure out what type of life insurance we need, and apply for coverage without ever interacting with a person.
There are a lot of limitations with the AI though. And so just so you know, my stance on it, I've been doing a lot of research, reading a lot of research papers, and I can go into what I found in my research papers, but I'm the person that is screaming at the top of the lungs that if you're not embracing AI and using AI, you're probably going to be outlasted by someone else who is, but there are limitations to it. An example I give you is the phone call that I had with the tattoo parlor to schedule it. One, you could clearly tell it was an AI because it wasn't responsive. But then as someone who does programming and that type of stuff, I could hear it in a loop, and it hit a loop where it kept reverting back to the same scenario. So what are some of the limitations you have, and, how do we surpass that?
I am a like-minded person. I am also screaming from the rooftops. I'm producing AI advocacy content every single day. At 39 years old, I believe this, and I say this to people, particularly people who are older than me. You're not too old to adapt and adopt and implement. Humans are not going to be replaced by AI. Non-augmented humans will be replaced by AI augmented humans. If you're not using it, you are not going to be able to keep up. Period. It can do things that we just can't. It can do things in seconds that would take us hours and days. So on that topic, limitations, it's only as good as what you put into it. So, to your topic about the phone system, whether it's even an AI or even a large language model or just a basic program, the limitations are on the user who builds it. So when I train a bot for sales, for example, I have to teach it how I talk. I have to show it, like through interactions with real life clients, how people communicate, how they understand questions and how they answer questions so that it can have a more precise response. Now, some of the phone systems that you're talking about are getting pretty good. I mean, they're not great. They're not all good or great. Some of them are bad, but some of them are really good. I mean, I encountered one the other day where it also had background noise, like it was in an actual office with people talking in the background.
Wow, that's
And
interesting.
for a second, I doubted if it was an AI. And then I tested it and I was like, oh yeah, this is really cool.
Yeah, I started using some of them to make a podcast. You can clearly tell it hits a loop because they start the same way. They have an intro. They have the same type of, but it's two AI voices talking to each other. So that's pretty interesting to see. And pretty interesting story was I was at work and I made one, and it was just like in infancy. I just was starting it, and I told a code worker, I told him, hey, listen to this and tell me what you think of it. It's actually two AIs talking. And when I hit play, he literally was like, is that you talking? I just told you it was two AIs talking. So it's pretty interesting to see that. Do you know much about AGI?
Actual AI, like actual artificial general intelligence, like the real deal, not a large language model like what we're interacting with now.
Yeah. So I'm thinking through some of these scenarios because one of the limitations I see with the AI right now is that you have to give it an input to do a task. What we have right now, I think it's very strong because as you continue to teach it, all those errors that you receive or what you don't like, the inconsistencies, or if it's just not at your standard, you could correct that because of machine learning. So it's going to get better, stronger, and faster as we move to the future, which is very challenging for humans to do. So like with AGI and augmented AI, or, what I was reading through is agentic AI. So with agentic AI, you could create tasks that you would do over time and it will solve those complex problems. So essentially what you would do is if you're a business, you give it a long-term goal and it will reach that goal at that time you give it and backwards plan it. Any thoughts on that?
I use it that way for my businesses now. I mean, it helped me stand up an AI-powered lead generation business for the financial service industry with that exact process where I told it what I wanted the business to do and the timeline and the goals, and it created a business plan to achieve it. And so far, it's on pace.
Nice. And so if this is happening, right, I actually am doing some analysis and I'm working on, like I said, the research. And some of the research that I'm working on suggests that you could probably get rid of about 30% of your workforce. Now I have to work to prove that and show that it's working, right? What would happen to those people? What are some of the ideas or futuristic type of ideas that you would think would happen?
This is a really deep philosophical topic that you're talking about right now. It's what does the world look like when there is no more intellectual work to be done, right? When it becomes a value-based economy instead of a resource-based economy. And I suspect that we are on that trajectory right now. And it's not just AI, it's quantum computing, power generation, right? It's all these new power sources that are coming online. It's robotics, right? It's not just 30% of jobs that get replaced because it's going to be a lot more than 30%. If you think about just in America, how many truck drivers there are, how far away are we from autonomous trucks, autonomous drivers, right? When you think about all the Amazon delivery people in the world, how far is Amazon away from having delivery drones and having a truck that drives up to a neighborhood and 20 drones pop out and deliver all the packages in 15 minutes? These are examples of how material sciences, machine learning, and technology is moving us to a place where there won't be work for people. And so I suspect that one way or the other, we're going to end up at some sort of UBI type civilization.
Yeah, I actually came across the same idea. I do have some thoughts on that, and we can go into the philosophy behind it. But so a lot of resistance I see from people, they say, well, that's not true because people settle people. So the AI isn't going to be able to settle me. So how would you respond to something like that?
What do they say? AI what?
So what a lot of people I run into who are in sales, they always say people settle people, and an AI robot isn't going to take my job. Or a plumber, he's like, well, they can't have a robot come and do my job. I actually have to go out there and fix the plumbing. How would you respond to something like that?
I think that for the plumber and most service jobs, not new construction, right? New construction can definitely be done by machines, but certainly service work, air conditioners, electrical, plumbing, roofing, those types of trades are going to be hard for technology to replace in the short term and probably the long term. But your salespeople, they don't stand a chance. They can be AI augmented and they'll be able to hang in for a while. But at the end of the day, the machine doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have bad days. It doesn't need coffee. It doesn't get sick, right? It doesn't get called to the school to pick up their kid because they got a cut on their leg, right? But it can also know the products better than the person.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, one of the topics I want to bring up is in the research I was reading is we've kind of been trained to go down this route because of computers, specifically your iPhone and the services we're receiving from that. So I'll give you an example. Services like Amazon or Netflix or any of those services where you can access it and put in an order 24 hours a day. They've kind of conditioned us to have 24-hour service. And so what it was suggesting, the research article I was reading, and I can put all the research articles in the description, but what it was explaining was since we've conditioned to that, we're going to expect to be able to just call a doctor's office and have an appointment, or maybe speak to someone 24 hours a day, or go to any service and have 20. And so that meets your point. Is the point I'm saying is that having these AIs that don't need vacation time, that don't need sick time, kid time. This is another example of why it could be taking over a person's job. Also, too, when you're talking about companies who the CEO and the board holders are, their primary goal is to take care of their shareholders, and you can eliminate a lot of that extra costs. I think it's it's like the perfect storm about to merge.
Storm for the people, for sure. Storm for the people. Corporations, on the other hand, they have a lot to gain from this, right? To your point, I mean, if you own a chain of restaurants, one of the biggest vulnerabilities you have is your servers, the people on the front lines interacting with your clients when they come into the restaurant, right? If you can pay a server $30,000 a year or buy a robot for $15,000, and you don't have to worry about that robot giving a customer a bad experience, right? You don't have to worry about a miscommunication or an inappropriate slur or some non-socially acceptable conversation happening at a table because a robot is taking the order and delivering the food. That's a no-brainer for the restaurant.
Yeah, but on the reverse, some of the risks that you have are compliance issues. And so I do think there's going to be a need for a AI department in organization, much like, so this is part of what I'm trying to prove out in one of my theses that I'm doing, is that much like the technology that you have in computers that went widespread across industries, and now you have the CTO with their organizations, and you have a computer industry within a company. I'm putting out the extension that you're going to need an AI department for compliance as that's coming down. We do see some of the articles that I've read suggest that the Biden administration forced a lot of the government agencies to have a chief AI officer. And so with that, that's kind of like forward thinking, having that there, a chief AI officer in the future would suggest that they're going to force organizations, or there could be a forcing mechanism to have that in there. The reason I say that is much like I compare this to the cybersecurity industry, where there wasn't much of a need for the cybersecurity in the beginning. You got, people that got hacked, they just threw their computer away. And then that whole industry evolved because of compliance and regulatory needs. Also, two organizations who got hacked were getting sued. So it forced that, like a forcing mechanism. Do you have any thoughts on that, or how you would restructure organization if they're going to continue to integrate AI?
Yeah, so let's start from the top down. I mean, I don't see why the chief technology officer or chief AI officer couldn't also be an AI tool themselves, number one. And number two, as far as compliance is concerned, I don't I don't know how I feel about the language of compliance, and I'll be really clear about what influences that statement. Doing financial services for people, helping people apply for life insurance specifically, they have to give consent for the insurance companies to pull their medical. Once they give that consent, the AI can go do whatever it wants. It can scrub their prescription history. Do you know about the Medical Information Bureau?
No, go ahead and explain.
Yeah, so the MIB is a private entity, and many years ago, they lobbied the US government to require all medical professionals to report everything that goes on in their practice to the MIB for the purpose of protecting private insurance companies from fraud so that you couldn't have a serious disease and go apply for life insurance, right? That there was a centralized database of everyone's health record. Well,
Interesting.
I mean, in the past few years, these things have been compromised. I mean, it's fairly common for a person to apply for coverage and be told, no, you have XYZ condition that they do not have. I had a client a few months ago, a young man, who, according to his medical record, had stage 3 metastatic pancreatic cancer. And he doesn't. We called the hospital that showed that on his report, and they were like, we don't have him as a patient. And we showed them the report. We said, explain how this got on here. And they couldn't. And so when you talk about compliance and AI, I think the cat's already out of the bag. I think a lot of the data that's out there is already corrupted. It's already been disseminated. I think that the notion of compliance is kind of just like holding the good guys accountable, unfortunately.
But I go back to the cybersecurity mechanism. You know, computer systems, they were founded off of no real security. You know, they just made the computer system, didn't really put any security into it. And then the computers evolved and it integrated into work. And then there was not real, you know, penalties and compliance until there was a standard. So what I'm suggesting is that in the future, there should be some type of organization that stood up that would have a regulatory risks kind of matrix where you could assess the risk of the AI, because there is, if you have access, if that AI agent, at some point you're going to have to categorize these AI agents as people. And I think that's where the challenging part comes in even more, because if we're categorizing it as a person, does that person have privileged access to that information, which they've already seen? Does that make sense?
I agree that there should be a regulatory body to make sure that there is some sort of expectation or standard. I do agree with that. I don't think that it should be the Wild West. I don't think that companies should be able to just implement whatever processes and procedures they want through these bots. I just think that the way that these things are learning and the way that they're growing and the way that people are interacting with them now and will more and more people will be interacting with them, the information is already being shared.
The point I'm going across is that, you know, when you're running a business, I think that business should, you know, first you have to establish the standard, just like the NIST standard for, you know, that's how it is in cybersecurity. You have the NIST standard, you have common vulnerability databases, which tell you all the vulnerabilities that are known. And, you know, the same could happen for the AI. And as that evolves, then you integrate people in your organization. And I think the forcing mechanism is not going to happen until these companies get sued and have large lawsuits because of it. But it's not, I'm not saying it has to be mandated, and it's not something that, but I think it's going to be a forcing mechanism by the market.
I agree. I mean, people are going to get upset, right? They're going to have experiences, things are going to happen, and there will be lawsuits. Absolutely. And I guess it'll depend on how those lawsuits play out to see how regulation does get implemented, whether it becomes mandatory or if it's one of those industry self-regulating things, which I don't generally agree with.
Yeah. And so one of the ideas, how would you look at this, is having these systems focus more on routine tasks that don't give you much return on your investment, to allow the people to go and do like the work that lands the sale. I'll give you an example is, you know, checking your email, all of that mundane tasks that you do throughout the day that you don't want to do. You have the AI do that, and then you give the people the freedom to go make and close those deals. Is that a good idea, or would the AI be able to do everything?
So this topic directly correlates to your conversation about instant gratification. Excuse me. This question is about whether or not a person has to wait to talk to another person to make a purchase. And I think that the answer is no. I think that an AI tool can do the entire process. And as much as it pains me, because I've been selling something my whole life, and I feel like the way that I help people through a consultative process, you know, helping them figure out what they need and then helping them find the product or service that does what they need, while I feel like I'm bringing them value because I'm doing it genuinely, an AI tool can do it, and it can ask for the sale, and it can collect payment information, and it can process a transaction. And so, I think that it will check emails, it will respond to emails. It already can do all of those things, and it can also do sales. I mean, it can, some of these AI closing tools for just for life insurance as another, just to keep that consistent. It can ask all the necessary underwriting questions, and it can plug all that into a quoting tool, and it can produce products and provide a quote proposal, and a person can pick, and then it can send them a link from the carrier, and the person can complete their application, and they don't have to talk to another person. As much value as I believe that interaction has for the consumer, if I'm not available to talk to them and they want their insurance now, the AI is the solution.
Yeah. And, one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that you have two frame of thoughts out there with people that I've run into. You have the one that is, yes, it's going to happen, embrace it. And then you have the people who call me delusional and crazy. And, a lot of times at work, I'm telling them this and they're like, go sit in the corner. You're crazy. So how would you address a person who is telling you it's not going to happen? Everyone's said that many times before and we're here and fine.
You remember when you were a kid and your parents told you that color TV was trash and that rock and roll was just noise and that computers were just as bad and that the internet was just for nerds? Well, the generations that tell you that AI isn't going to happen, they're the generation that told their parents, you're wrong. And they pioneered those technologies and they brought those things into the mainstream. And today, AI is just the color of TV of the past. It's just the color TV of today. It's not going away. It is going to be around, and it is important that everybody adopts, and implements.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I always equate the technology back to some former technology or system. So when I say another technology, I revert back, like you said, to internet and the computer, and you can walk it back. I think about it in this sense, and you and I would know this, but I don't think a lot of the younger generations would know this. And I'm not saying this in an insulting manner, but I remember if you took me back to when I was 18 years old and told me that I would be checking myself out at a Walmart, I would say you're crazy. And if you told me all the things that we were kind of trained to do as a consumer, like go to McDonald's and not speak to someone, but go to a kiosk. And, you can really feel these businesses are being more technology first, and they're willing to have the little bit of an inconvenience in the moment to train the people. The reason I say that is I went to a resort, and at the resort, I went to a Dunkin' Donuts, which is fairly common. You go up to the person and order your food. However, at this place, the person would not take my order. They continue to tell me to go to the kiosk to make my order. So I felt like I was being trained. Everyone else was just go to the kiosk, but I felt like they were more of a kiosk first business and person second. And so I feel like that is where we're going with this. And I think we're hitting the same topic. So
that's exactly what's happening. Corporations that have high volumes, small transactions, they absolutely have a tremendous amount to gain by automating and electrifying their processes. I mean, to the point that I made earlier about servers, right? When you go to a fast food restaurant and you place an order and you watch a person, staring at their screen trying to figure out your order because it's their first day or their first week, or, they had a rough night and they're not feeling great, right? I don't have to be more specific than that, right? But, or they've got some kind of drama in their life and they're not able to focus, right? They're dealing with the public. That's intense. If you've never done it in a face-to-face environment like that, it can be very intense. People are intense, right? And so it would make sense that a fast food chain would start conditioning its staff and saying, hey, listen, we need humans in the kitchen for now. We don't really need humans at the register. Everybody has a debit card or credit card in their pocket. Most people have, touchless payment systems on their person. Why are we risking the experience with a person? Why not just have a screen or an app where they can just go in and place their order, and then we just call out their number and they come get it? That way, if there's something wrong with their order, it's not our fault, it's their fault, right? If they didn't place their order properly, they can't leave us a bad review. I mean, they can, it would just be, right?
Yeah, so we're coming up on 10 more minutes left, and I just want to ask you maybe one or two more questions. So you starting out in AI, how did you get into it? I know we spoke about that, but if you were starting right now, what would you do? Is kind of where I'm going with that question.
What I tell most people who ask me about AI is I say, start with ChatGPT. It's going to be the easiest for you to start with. It's going to be the easiest for you to engage with. And it's going to be the easiest for you to learn and understand how to prompt, how to engage with AI. And then once you're there, it will recommend other AI tools that will help you achieve your goals. So if you're going to start making video content and you ask ChatGPT, hey, I want to have a blog post about hair coloring or hair curling or yoga, right? It'll say, hey, here's an AI video tool that will help you, create a brand and do editing for you. And it'll provide you a link to go right to their site. So when I encourage people to embrace, adapt and adopt, I generally have them start with ChatGPT and start with basic things, asking it questions like, how can you serve me? Right? I'm a dental assistant. I'm a board member on a city council. I'm a teacher, right? What can you do for me? And then it might ask you some questions, or it might just tell you what it can do for you, right? If you're a teacher, it might say something like, well, I don't know how much time you spend doing lesson plans, but if you tell me what grade and what subjects you teach, I can bang out your lesson plans for the month in about 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's a good point. And with the new projects tab that it has, you can create the little custom ones and you can kind of prep it. So if you were going to do multiple tasks, you can say you were a teacher and have it be an 8th grade teacher. And every time you go to that tab, it kind of will already be conditioned and ready for you to go in. One thing, I know you didn't ask me for a tip, but one thing that I like to do, and there's a method I found on the internet, is called Ryzen. It's called roles, instructions, sets. So if you have that, that is pretty much a framework that is pretty successful. But what I do is I actually use it to make the prompt for me. So I always just tell it, you're an expert prompt engineer, use the Ryzen method to create a prompt for this, and it creates a perfect prompt. And then I copy and paste that in. So that's pretty effective. The one thing I did want to tell
I
you,
would consider that middle to advanced usage, though. What you just talked about, using the Ryzen method and generally understanding how that works, that is the best case, right? That is an evidence that you're an advanced user, that you understand those concepts. But for new people, whether it be younger people or older people, that's a little bit more abstract when they're first getting started, right? When you say role, they don't really understand what that means until they're interacting with it. And so the example that you gave would be, as an 8th grade teacher, as an 8th grade science teacher, craft a lesson plan. We're focused on the solar system. Oh, I don't know, right? Whatever. So you were talking about the process by which we teach AI how to work. You were talking about Ryzen and how you did command prompts and you get it to give you the expert command.
Yeah. And so one of the things to tell you that, going back to the plumber analogy, and this is the last thing, and then we'll go into your websites and stuff, is the plumber that I ran into, he told me, well, I'm not at risk because I could go to someone's house and I'm always going to be needed. However, I argued back with him because I'll take the opposite side for any debate. So if you want to ever debate me, I'll take the opposite side for anything. And what I told him was I pulled out the chat GBT and I put the camera on. Have you seen that feature on there? And so what I told him was, well, what's going to replace you isn't the AI, but it's going to be a plumber using the AI to upsell the customer, make more revenue. And now I have more money in my budget to market. And now I can get you out of the market by acquiring your customers before you could, because now I've raised more revenue through an upsell process, which you were not using, So and then he looked at me like I was crazy, but there's a role for it. If you can be creative, you can probably use it for anything.
I thought you were going to go a totally different route. That's absolutely true. What you just said, I just thought you were going to go a different route about people being able to do things themselves now. Right? I'll give you a really good
point.
example. My air conditioner started acting up in December. I live in Florida, so December in Florida, your air conditioner can go out, and that's great. And so my AC went out, and I asked it, what are the troubleshooting steps? And it walked me through the troubleshooting steps. And it was very easy for me, an able-bodied person, to go do these steps. And then it ultimately led to a circuit board was fried. And I was able to take a picture of the circuit board, feed it to AI. Actually, I gave it right to Google Lens, and it was able to find that part on Amazon. And that circuit board was $46 delivered the next day. And it took me 15 minutes to replace it. It was just unplugging some wires and plugging them back in. And so to your point, I mean, if I would have called an HVAC technician, it would have been $200 to come out and tell me it was the circuit board. I called around and nobody would give me a quote to replace the circuit board without coming out for $200 to inspect it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found is very helpful is you tell it to explain it to you at like a very rudimentary level. So maybe an elementary level.
That's great.
I use it a lot for my daughter with her school. So I pull out that camera and put her homework there and tell it to teach her. Like it was actually interesting one time. We went to the park and I pulled it out just to so we were trying to find the solar system and find out where what star was above the moon that was had already been out. When I pulled it out, I said, "Oh," and I asked a question, and it responded to my daughter's name, where it already knew all of that information in it. So, it's actually interesting how much it learns from you.
It
So
is
let's talk
important
about.
to build
Go
a
ahead.
project.
Go
It
ahead.
is important to build a project and tell it who it is and what you expect from it.
Yeah, and so let's go into your business. Let's do some promotions and see where what we can do to highlight some of the things you're doing.
Sure. So the website is thejaffeagency.com, and it's a very simple site. You can go to it, and there's plenty of links to click on. And if you come on down to the bottom, you'll see a link for AI-powered lead service, where we're able to use AI and AI algorithm to track user cookies. All those websites you go to and ask you about cookies, well, a lot more sites are tracking them than you think, and we can use that information to dial into a very specific client profile.
Well, I appreciate you having coming on to the podcast, and I look forward to speaking to you again.